Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome to this second school boundary forum that we're holding for the north side of our school district. My name is Mark Anderson. I'm Associate Superintendent for the school district and will be serving as your host tonight. The purpose of tonight is really to provide you with information on the work our Boundary Adjustment Committee has been undertaking over the past year to get to this point of a draft. Is certainly not final yet. We're wanting your feedback and questions and comments to help our committee go back to work and refine our proposal to change boundaries, give you some information on why we're doing this, as well as kind of what the timeline will be for actually making boundary changes in the school district. I'm pleased to have joining me tonight several of our Boundary Adjustment Committee members, many of them from the north side of the district, and I'll go around and introduce the panelists before we start our presentation. First is Molly Merkel, a parent up on the north side, and second is, let's take Matt, let's take a look here. I'll go down. Karina Fletcher. Karina is a teacher and a parent on the north side of the district. We also have Matt McFarland, who's a principal up on the north side at Salk Middle School. Then we have Peter Richter. Peter is a parent over in the West Hills area, north side. We have Stephanie Lundberg, who will be the new principal of the new middle school right across on Foothills from next to Gonzaga Prep on the north side. We have Lindsay Shaw, who's a parent on the north side, also chair of the Logan Neighborhood Council as well. Rod Tamura, who's a teacher on the north side at Rogers High School and also has been a parent with his kids when they were in school on the north side. And then Julie Shepard is a parent up in the Indian Trail area, north side, and has been serving on the committee. And then we have a few of our kind of experts who've been helping us guide the work over the past year. First is Phil Crocker. Phil is a consultant working with us on the boundary. Also, Harriam Martin Morris. Harriam, raise your hand. Is also a consultant working with us. And then two of our folks that's providing us all the data is Craig Namata, who's our Director of Budget, and Ryan Rowe, our Supervisor of Student and Fiscal Data. They've been helping the committee all along as we've been working to come up with tonight a draft that we want to explain to you how we got here and then get your feedback and orientation to it. So with that, let me start with getting the presentation up. The presentation, by the way, will probably take about an hour. We want you to be fully educated, and we apologize up front for it being so long, but this is certainly a complicated topic that we are dealing with. And these webinars we're doing, you're certainly welcome to, if you have an interest, to come to the forums next week. They will be focusing more on the south side of the district. Tonight is on focusing on the north side of the district. So we'll have this presentation first. Then you'll notice on in your Zoom webinar, there's a question and answer button that you can put in questions, and we'll talk about how we're going to answer them. Or if you'd rather just send the committee your comments or questions, you can use this email address called boundaries@sps81.org. I would encourage you tonight to kind of hold off on your questions because we may answer them during the presentation. But if we haven't, or you want to comment about some of the information you're hearing, certainly be able to put that into that question and answer box. We have a couple of our panelists who will answer some of them during the presentation. And then at the end of the presentation, we will have a kind of a moderator section where different panelists will be asked some of the questions that have come in. Some may have been answered in the Q&A, or others we may save to the end. Bottom line is all the questions that come in tonight, all the comments, they will you'll get an answer in the next couple of weeks, and they'll all go to our committee so that our Boundary Adjustment Committee members has a really good sense of what the community, their reaction to this draft that we have. And if you haven't gone there yet, we would encourage you to go to the district's website at spokaneschools.org/boundary change. You will see there lots of good information in a kind of a frequently asked question approach with answers that our committee members have helped develop. So that's another good place to get information about the proposals and why we're doing this. So with that, as I mentioned, the purpose of tonight is for you to get some information from us, and then for us to hear your questions and feedback that'll go to the committee when we start work again in May on our next iteration of the boundary changes. So why are we doing this? Here are the topics that we're going to cover tonight. Why boundary changes? What's the timeline? Who's on our committee? What are the guidelines we're using and things that are influencing the committee's draft that you're going to see tonight? What's the estimated impact going to be on students and families? There's also a legacy status the board just recently adopted that will help kind of smooth this transition for students that are currently in school, and I'll explain that. Also about our choice programs, our option programs, our special programs, what impact boundaries will have on that. Then finally tonight, what everybody's interested in is looking at our current maps and what the proposed maps will be. And this particular proposal that we have tonight, it follows a school cohort model where it's trying to keep neighborhood students together all the way through from elementary to middle school to high school. So why are we adjusting school boundaries? Several reasons. First, and probably the most important, is we are trying to provide enough classroom space in our elementary schools so that we can have lower class size at kindergarten through 3. Legislation was passed back in 2015 that funded the teachers for lower class size, but many districts like Spokane doesn't have space to actually create that many more classrooms. So one of the reasons we're doing this is to change boundaries so that we have more space. When we first looked at it, we thought we would have to build 6 more elementary schools to accommodate having kindergarten through 3rd grade classes at about 20-1. As we did a study, we decided to move our 6th graders up into the middle school, into a 6, 7, 8 middle school configuration. And by doing that, we created enough space to lower our class size at elementary. But we are, as you know, with the 2018 bond, building 3 new middle schools to accommodate all those 6th graders moving up into the 6th grade middle school model. So that's one big reason why we're needing to change boundaries. The second is we are growing in student population in Spokane. If you read this weekend's paper, Spokane is listed as one of the 10 hottest housing markets on the West Coast, or in the US, matter of fact. And so we are poised to grow, especially on our west and east boundaries of the district. That's where there's room for developments. So another reason for us to change boundaries is to anticipate our schools growing and trying to equalize capacity. We're, as you know, in the process of going to be building 3 new and middle schools and opening them over the next 2 to 3 years. Then finally, balancing school sizes and capacity. Because we have not changed boundaries for over 40 years, and because where kids live has changed over those 40 years, we have some schools that are full, totally full, can't accommodate neighborhood students. And matter of fact, we have to bus students out of the neighborhood to other schools just to make room. Then we have other schools that are under capacity that really need to be right-sized and have more students. So balancing school sizes is an important part so that we have room for this growth in the future as we have more and more students. And then finally, secondary reason, one, we haven't adjusted boundaries for over 40 years. But number 2 is we would like to ease the transition between school levels where we have groups of students going together out of their neighborhoods. We have some of our schools, and matter of fact, you'll see one model here where we split 14 elementary schools to different middle schools. We'd like to reduce that because there, and Harry will talk about, there is research that says by keeping neighborhood kids together, that they do better in school. So this is kind of the timeline that we started with. Clear back in 2015, when we realized we didn't have enough schools to lower our class size at elementary. So we did this great configuration study in 2016-17 and decided to build 3 new middle schools and move our 6th graders up. The bond was passed overwhelmingly by Spokane citizens. This was that partnership bond with the city of Spokane where they provided us land for these 3 new middle schools, one on the northeast side across from G Prep, one out by Albee, they provided us that land, and then one up on the South Hill by Mullen Road. That then started a committee's work to say, if we're going to change boundaries, what should be the guidelines that a committee should use when they're changing boundaries? And we'll share with you tonight what that committee came up with. It's not the current committee, but it was a previous committee. The board adopted the guidelines and have given them to our committee, the Boundary Adjustment Committee, to use as we've been working on a draft. And that's where we are right now. We're in the 2021 school year. We've been working for about a year, and we have a draft, but we have more work to do getting the feedback from the community. We're hoping the board will adopt the boundary changes in June, well in advance of when the boundaries have to change, so that everybody can kind of start the planning process. So here was the charge of our current committee, was to take those recommended guidelines and propose adjustments for the with the 3 new middle schools coming on board, the student growth in the area throughout the district, to come up with a set of recommendations that the board could approve. And many folks are on the committee. You saw the folks here at the top that were participating tonight, but we have parents and staff from the Northeast, the Northwest, the Southeast, the Southwest. Karina, not only is a parent and teacher on the North side, but she's representing the Spokane Education Association. Then several administrators, school principals, assistant principals. We have central office staff. We have 2 board members actually serving on the committee. And then our superintendent, as needed, has been working with us on the committee. So for our work, where we are is we started a year ago in January of 2020. We've been exploring options as a committee ever since then. Tonight, we have a draft proposal that we finished up in March, and here we are getting feedback from the community. Then we'll go back to work in May, and then come back to the board in June. And then the board is going to hold their own input sessions. They're going to hold public hearings. So there's more opportunity than just tonight to give the school board input. And with that, I will let Harriam talk about the guidelines the previous committee adopted and got adopted by the board that we've been using as kind of our big picture guidelines as we have developed a draft that you'll see tonight.
So thank you, Mark. These are the guidelines that were passed by the board and approved last year. I will tell you that they are not in any rank order, because the process is one that is, everything is very interrelated. And in fact, some of these things are in conflict with each other. When we talk about diversity versus neighborhood, there's a tension there. It's a natural tension that happens when you're going through this process. And so you can look at it in terms of, if your neighborhoods aren't diverse and you are going for neighborhood schools, then your schools won't be diverse. So how do we adjust and adapt for that tension to get the best result overall? When we talk about neighborhoods, we're using, we use the term cohort, which is more than just the physical or more than just the geography, but thinking in terms of clusters or collection of students within an area. And so during this presentation, you'll hear that word cohort quite a bit, and by extension, neighborhood. That's the reason why we're striving to keep students together as much as we know how, because the research tells us that students that are kept in a cohort model do tend to do better overall when they are transitioning. School quality, it is what it says it is. Spokane has been working very hard and very diligently around school quality, and school quality is more than just a single test score. It is the entire environment that the school has. And in Spokane, you have what's called key performance indicators. And the superintendent's been working very hard to ensure that we see improvement in those key performance indicators across all of the schools, so that all of the schools become quality schools. And with regard to transportation, as we do this boundary work, the key element there is trying to, when possible, to also keep the transportation costs under control, so that we're not doing some of the things that we're currently doing now, which is transporting kids from one part of town, passing multiple schools to get to a third school. That increases our costs. So if we can get and transport students closer to their schools, we will be able to impact the financial cost of transportation as well.
So in addition to the guidelines that Hariam just went over, there's been other factors that have been influencing the committee's work, and I would ask that Phil talk about some of those influences that has gone into this current draft.
Thank you, Mark. As the committee's been working since, again, a year ago, January, they worked within the boundaries as the guardrails in a sense, but they also realized that they needed to get a little more granular in some areas. So the influences that emerged naturally through the work, and the committee has gone through the entire district multiple times at different layers, and then at the last time with all three layers, elementary, middle, and high together. What we looked at was anticipated areas of growth. And as Dr. Anderson mentioned, the growth is tending to happen on the edges. And for attendance boundaries, that's challenging, because that limits the flexibility the committee has on schools, just because there's edges to the school district. So you'll see some maps in a bit, and you'll get a sense of the challenges the committee is facing when they see growth happening in areas where they don't have necessarily school capacity, because they just don't exist. Maintaining cohorts to limit impacts on transitions. I think both Mark and Hariam have spoken to that. Incredibly research-based, incredibly data-based, and especially those students who are most challenged in school. The research absolutely supports that maintaining cohorts helps those kids as they transition between elementary and middle and high. A nice piece of ancillary data is that it also keeps families focused and engaged in their schools. There's a natural drop-off at middle school and another drop-off at high school with parental engagement. It is natural, but when you have families that move together and students that move together to the next school, when the whole elementary school goes to the same middle school, then that really helps keep families together, because they're already engaged and that engagement can flow forward. So that's helpful. It also helps teachers in vertical planning, because they can get to know where the students are going and work between the schools. We talked about the sixth grade impact. When we move sixth grade students into our middle schools, it necessarily requires us to move some kids out of those schools to make room for those kids. And that's why we're building 3 new ones. So we'll talk more about that tonight, but that factored in. Family access to schools. When we focused on family engagement, we also had to focus on the reality of, can families get to those schools? And what does that look like? So the committee's been working with that. And then we've talked about this tension between neighborhood cohorts, which aren't necessarily socioeconomically balanced. In fact, most, in a sense, neighborhood cohorts tend to not be socioeconomically balanced. And there's a life cycle and a transition that happens in those neighborhoods as things change. And so the committee worked hard with the staff to say, how do we keep kids together and also do the best we can to see as we make these transition assignments between elementary, middle, and high, the impacts it's having. And sometimes there's like, it's a water balloon. You squeeze one side and the other side balloons, you squeeze that side and the other side balloons. And that is the tension in cities all around the country between the socioeconomic diversity within their neighborhoods and within their schools. Mark, if we thank you. This is an example. The committee looked at a lot of data regularly, and as new versions of maps were generated, and we're currently, I think our current map is labeled number 119, and we didn't look at all those maps, but they were all generated in one form or another. Sometimes we tossed 2 or 3 away to get to the one the committee needed to see the next time. But this is an example of the kind of data the committee would see. There's much more than this. This is an example of free and reduced lunch status. And you can see up top, the balanced enrollment, special education, English language development, and racial diversity were also considered by the committee as they looked at what were the impacts in each iteration of the map as they made different decisions or asked us to go back and create a different map. And the way you look at this, you look kind of vertically, we tried to put some arrows in, and you can see that we've added 3 new middle schools at the bottom. The existing middle schools are at the top. And if you look at, for example, the rightmost is Sacagawea, and you can see that the current planning percentage is 36.6% free and reduced lunch, and the impact of changes would make it 36.5% free and reduced lunch. As you move over, if you look at Shaw, you can see it goes from currently 86 to a proposed 83, and so on. And again, it's really important to understand that these are planning numbers. These aren't the actual numbers. These are neighborhood kids within a mapped zone that we then move forward through the planning process. And as long as we keep that same data set, we can get a sense of impact. But the numbers can change quite a bit as Spokane has a portfolio model of schools for families. And so a lot of kids can choice in and out. In many schools, we see as many kids choice out as choice in. And that can really change some of the demographics of those schools. So I would caution you that we, as the planning committee, have gotten used to using these as planning numbers, but they're not necessarily going to match up with the actuals until the families enroll and until choice is done and until the school year starts. And then you can know what the free and reduced lunch rates actually are. Also, the robust set of this data we will put up on the website. We have it about ready to go on the SPS FAQ site about boundaries, and you can be able to look through all the data sets yourselves if you would like. One thing the committee early on really tried to do is they came out of the chute saying, hey, can we take this opportunity and rebalance some of the free and reduced lunch? As you saw on that previous slide, we have schools in the 30s and 40s, we have schools in the 70s and 80s. And can we do better than that? It was a good question. And that's a bit of a proxy for diversity in Spokane, free and reduced lunch rate. And so we went to work with it. And the only way in Spokane to really get at that is if you combine the north side and south side in each of these schools. So what you're looking at here is a very kind of messed up map that has vertically sliced each of those slices and colors is a middle school. So the yellow or the orange, for example, is Shaw Middle School. The blue to the right is Chase Middle School. And the district would need to bus students from one end of the district to the other, and students and families in elementary schools would be really broken up to achieve a sense of balance in the free and reduced lunch status. And while it is nice if you can achieve that, the research absolutely supports students staying together through cohorts substantially more for their educational outcomes than it does busing them around a city trying to achieve sort of a reconfiguration of socioeconomics opposite of where the neighborhoods are. So the committee worked with this for a little bit and put it aside. And then as we moved on through the rest of the maps, they were reminded of this, but then did look in each local area, was there positive impacts they could make on those free and reduced lunch rates while trying to keep cohorts together.
I might mention, Phil, just for the audience so they understand what the yellow dots are and what the blue dots are. Yellow is free and reduced students on free and reduced lunch, and the blue dots are fee-paying students, so who would be from a higher income. So As Phil said, this is an attempt to balance all the middle schools, including the 3 new ones, with the free and reduced lunch.
Thank you. And we do have to be a little bit careful with the data anytime you're using free and reduced lunch data as a proxy for diversity, because it does have a natural fall off at middle school and high school as students stop reporting. So it doesn't mean that there's less students in those socioeconomic brackets. They're just not reporting as they get older more often than not. Craig, can you, so the other question we're faced with often is, why can't kids just go to their closest school? That seems really like a no-brainer, and it does on the surface. And so what we did is we pulled together some maps to explain what would happen if we tried to send kids to their closest school. And Craig, can you walk us through this real briefly?
Sure. So we were looking at all 9 middle schools, and we used a 1.25 mile radius around each school because that gave us roughly 700 to 800 students per circle, which is about the capacity of each middle school. And what we sorted by drawing these circles around each middle school is of the roughly 6,000 middle school students. So this will be 6,000 students when we get to 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So roughly 2,000-ish students per grade level. If you look at the map on the left, you can see all the students that live within 1.2 mile radius of a middle school, and some of those students live within the radius of multiple schools. In the Northeast and the Northwest in particular, there are pockets of kids that live within that distance of 3 middle schools. There are about 4,000 middle school students that, by this definition of a 1.25 mile radius, have access to their nearest middle school. In contrast, the map on the right shows all the students that live outside that 1.25 mile radius. It's not, this was our proxy to neighborhood and walkability. It wouldn't be exactly right because there are natural barriers, natural hills and bluffs and freeways and major arterials, but there are roughly 2,000 students that don't live within a 1.25 mile radius of their of the 9 middle schools in the locations that we have them.
Craig, can you talk about the high schools a little bit similarly?
So we did a similar exercise with the high schools. We increased the radius to 2 miles to get roughly 1,500 to 1,600 students per high school, because that's roughly actually our high schools have a little bit more capacity than that. That's our target size to equalize to put about the same number of students in each of our high schools. And you can see on the map on the left, there's even one little pocket in there that they're within 2 mile radius of four of the 5 high schools. There are roughly about 8,000 students in our high schools. About 75% of them would live within a 2 mile radius of one or more high schools. And then about 2,000 students live outside of that proximity radius.
Thank you, Craig. So as you saw in those maps, the edges were the challenge. That's where we have thousands of students and no school for them to go to. So as we begin to pull them into the schools, it creates a ripple effect throughout the other schools. We can go to the next slide. Thank you, Mark. So one thing we did about June, before the committee took a short break for part of the summer, is they had gone through all the elementary, middle, and high school boundaries at least once, came back through, looked at them together, and came up with like, okay, what's a good maybe stopping point? And we came to a pretty good one. And this is the elementary view of the boundaries at that point. At that point, 14 elementary schools were split into middle schools, meaning that of all, about a third of our middle schools, kids would be split when they went off to after elementary, they'd be split going into middle school. And then some of those kids, especially up in the north central section, were actually split again going into high school. And so those kids were being separated from their peers and their neighborhood kids more than once over the course of 3 or 4 years. So we came back to that, and the committee went back to work when they came back in late summer and worked through March on improvements. If we look at this, this is just a tabular format of the same map you just looked at, but you can get a sense if you look, for example, if you go down on the left-hand side to Lynnwood and you look across, you can see that Lynnwood was sending 134 kids to Sauk and 150 to Gary. Similarly, Westview would send 40 to Sauk and 166 to the New Northwest. If you go all the way down to Hutton, Hutton would be sending 40 to the New Northwest and 209 to Sacagawea. And then if you look at the inset table, that's the high school. And again, you see that the New South Middle School would send kids to LC and Ferris. The New Northeast was sending kids to LC and North Central. The New Northwest was sending kids to three high schools. And those kids were just getting really kind of their peer cohorts are being torn up pretty rough. And the committee wanted to see if we could do something better with that. And that led us to what we're kind of called the cohort model. And it's not, a plug and play solution by any stretch, but it really worked out for Spokane, which is kind of amazing given the size of your city. We were all really pleased to see that we were able to keep, actually in one model, all elementary school kids together going to middle school. Not one set of elementary schools had to be split. There were some socioeconomic challenges and transportation challenges in the south side, in the middle there, because again, schools aren't where we'd love to have schools relative to where people live. Their schools are where we can put schools. And so the committee went to work a little bit and refined it and came up with 4 elementary schools being split, but just, about less than a third of what they had earlier in June. And then 1 middle school in any model will need to split just because the number of high schools and the number of middle schools we have, and that's on the south side. The new south school will need to split between the 2 high schools on the south. But this is substantially better than where they were in June. And I think, across the district, kids and families can stay together in a K through 12 format, which you just wouldn't expect in a city the size of Spokane. It's just phenomenal. So that was where we landed. Ryan, I'm going to ask if Ryan could talk briefly about, okay, so they've come up with a cohort model and boundaries are going to need to change. Well, what is the impact on ongoing on the future kids?
Sure. And so at elementary school, we really try to limit movement when possible. So most elementary school movements were only made if we were trying to take advantage of a recently completed capital project, if our elementary schools were oversubscribed, or if we were attempting to resolve for imminent residential development. So with that lens, we were able to keep elementary movements down to 8%. So any of those movements really were because we had immediate planning concerns at the elementary level. At the middle school level, we knew it was going to be at least 33% of the middle schools that would be middle school impact to feeder patterns. The 42% was really driven because of the cohort model that Bill was discussing, along with resolving some long-term issues related to not adjustment of boundaries for 40 years. And then the 24% at the high school level was primarily resulting from us working to see if we could get 2 full middle schools into each of the high schools on the north side and on the South Hill. So we have 3 middle schools going into 2 high schools. And so this was sort of redesigning that distribution to make sure that was an equal split between those schools on the South Hill. In the end, the total impact is 30% of students will have a revision to their feeder patterns over the current boundaries. And on this slide, what we're trying to show here is A lot of folks are asking, well, why are my middle school boundaries changing? Why can't I go to my same middle school? And the reason is because we are moving sixth grade into middle school. So at a generic middle school, you're looking at about 800 students, capacity of 800 students for middle schools. And so now we are moving 276 graders in. So where we did have 400 seventh graders and 400 eighth graders, now you're looking at 3 grade levels where you have 270 students equaling that same enrollment. And so that is why those boundaries are shrinking.
Thank you, Ryan. And I can go ahead and take this next slide. So the sum total is that 99% of the elementary students in the city will stay in their neighborhood cohort for going into middle school, which again, just is a phenomenal number for a city the size of Spokane. There are the 4 elementary schools in this proposed draft that do split: Moran Prairie, Adams, Hutton, and Wilson. And the committee went back and forth on that. And that was, again, a compromise trying to get some equity and diversity balanced out in the center of the South Hill, and some transportation challenges, again, north-south in that area. And then all those students, though, of those 4 elementary schools, when those schools are split to the different middle schools, they all come back together for high school. So the kids that went to elementary school will then go to high school together again. So it's really great for them. On the New South Middle School, we talked about it needs a split, and right now the proposal has it split in roughly 58% Ferris, 42 to LC, and that's again before students make choices. The one exciting thing about balancing enrollment, besides, as Mark said, elementary schools where neighborhood kids today can't get into their elementary school, they have to be bussed out. So there now will be room for elementary kids to go to their neighborhood school, as well as some room for choice at most elementaries. At the high school level, we feel there will be ample room through this balancing for students to choice into the high school that offers the programs that best meet their family's needs, or maybe even the location that works best for them. And we think that will create a lot of flexibility to further kind of promote that portfolio model of schooling that lets families have choices. Mark, would you talk a little bit about the legacy status and the choice and options programs?
So as part of our boundary adjustments, the board recently adopted what is called a legacy policy, or grandfathering. What that means is if you are at a school, for example, you started 9th grade at Shadle Park High School, and the boundary changed so that where you lived would go to North Central. If you so choose, you can stay going to Shadle for the rest of your high school career. You have to apply to stay there as a legacy status, and we would provide you transportation. Same thing at middle school. If you were a 7th grader at Salk Middle School, and the boundaries changed so that you're supposed to go to the new Northwest Middle School, if you so chose, you can finish your 8th grade year at Salk Middle School. Same thing at elementary school. If you've gone K through 4 to, let's say, Westview Elementary on the north side, and your new boundary is going to have you go to Finch, you can finish your 5th grade year at Westview, and then go to the new Northwest Middle School as a 6th grader in that new 6, 7, 8 configuration. So that's one piece of the legacy policy. The second piece is younger siblings. So let's say you're that 5th grader at Westview, and you get to stay, but your younger sibling who's in 2nd grade was to go to Finch. That younger sibling gets first dibs, so to speak, at choicing back into Westview. They get kind of a higher priority. If the school has capacity, they would get to stay at Westview all the way through. They would need to provide their own transportation, just like our choice program. But if families, due to various reasons, want to stay at the school that the student started in, the legacy policy allows kind of a priority up before any other choice kids outside of that school boundary. So the legacy policy will go into effect for the north side during the 22-23 school year. That's when we will be changing the boundaries and adding the 2 new middle schools on the north side. And then in the 23-24 school year on the south side of the district, when that, so really the only choice people, so here's our choice policy is the next one. You know, as we know, people can choice into different schools if they have capacity. We have that happening all over the district for various reasons, from childcare to convenience to a preference of a certain school. That happens all the time, and that will continue to happen. Really, the only grade levels that this will impact of where you have to reapply to get to stay in that school is our current kindergarten, first and second graders. So those 3 grade levels will have to next year, next January, reapply to see if they get to stay when we actually change the school boundaries. Option programs like Spokane Public Montessori, the community school at the high school, the language immersion program out at Libby. All of those programs are district-wide programs. They're not affected by boundary changes. So no one needs to do anything really different than what they're currently doing if your young people are in any of those programs. Same thing with special programs. We have a lot of special education programs that are placed in a certain school. Those programs won't change either their location. Those are district-wide programs that are not bound or not influenced by school boundaries. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Phil. We'll show you a few charts here, and then we'll show you a few maps.
Yeah, Ryan, since you developed these, you just want to walk us real quick through what these are?
Sure. So what this shows is, first it starts off with the elementary schools, and it shows in column it shows whether or not the elementary school is going to have a boundary adjustment or not. So Arlington, for example, that is one where a portion of Arlington is being sent to Lynnwood in the proposed draft. So this shows that, yes, it's being adjusted, and it is students moving out, and there's no new students moving into the boundary. What it also shows is what the middle and the high school cohorts are going to be. So this is just a quick way for families to understand, one, what's my new feeder pattern? Are there any changes to my school's enrollment? And where am I going to middle and high school? If we go to the South Hill page, which is I think number 3, here you're going to see, because we had 3 middle schools splitting into 2 high schools, the best option for the South Hill did end up being to do a split of New South in order to balance out the enrollment between the high schools. And so what you're going to see on the far right column is it's going to show you roughly what's percentage of those middle school students are going to split off to each of the from New South into each of the high schools.
Thank you, Ryan. And again, this presentation will be available on the SPS website if you'd like to look at it later and go through that table a little bit more detail. But we try to give folks a view that they could find their school and then dig right into that. Just we're gonna change screens here real quick. There we go. And I'm gonna ask Craig to walk us through these maps. We're gonna look at we're gonna go through the north side of the elementary, middle, and high school maps, and we'll talk through them. And you know, one thing about the community, you saw it's the broad range of people from all different parts of the city. We have parents, community members, some people with no kids, some people with kids, young and older. There's not a plurality of thinking, which is wonderful. It's quite diverse focus within the community itself, and it is And there are some areas that we've landed on as a committee that we would like to bring forward and get feedback on, because we, you know, it's the best we could do to this point. We're wondering if what the community thinks and if there's some more work that needs to happen in those areas. So Craig's going to highlight a couple of those areas where I think the committee itself would really like to get feedback. And then this is also a great opportunity as we go through here to feel free to continue to ask questions. They'll be answered, or we'll answer them live. And if your question says answered live, it means that we do want to talk about it in the Q&A section where you'll still have the chance to ask more questions. So Craig, can you maybe walk us through, and I'll do the map here?
Sure. So this is a look at the elementary boundaries. The colored shapes are the elementary attendance areas. The red lines represent the proposed middle schools that you can see there on the north side. They're all grouped around a set of roughly 3 to 4 elementaries with a feeder pattern that all the elementaries, all the students of a single elementary will feed to the same middle school. There really are, on the north side, there were really only 5 elementaries that had boundary changes. When Mark was giving his examples of schools, he mentioned Westview. Westview is not a school that is having a boundary change. So anyone who's listening about Westview, there isn't anything to be concerned about for Westview. If you want to scroll down, Phil, the big purple one is probably the largest change. As a committee, we are proposing to take the northern section of the West Hills area, which is mostly west of the river, and moving that attendance area that is currently going to Hutton, being bused to the South Hill and going to Hutton. The proposal is to send them north to Finch Elementary. It's not a perfect fit. We needed a few more spaces available at Finch to make that work. And the capacity that we had happened to be at Holmes. So the proposal is to move a small neighborhood on the lower southeast corner of Finch, I think several blocks there, to move those families into the Audubon neighborhood. And then there's a small section in the northeast or the southeast corner of that was Audubon that would then be moved into Holmes. And the movement, the orchestration of movement of amongst those 3 schools would allow us to take advantage of the capacity that's currently at Holmes and to be able to fit all students in those 3 schools. The other 2 schools, the other 2 elementaries that
Craig, before you leave that, kind of walk the audience through all the work the committee went through, and why move this neighborhood out of Hutton where they've been assigned for many years? What was the issue at Hutton?
Oh, sure.
And what were the complexities of for Hutton?
So yeah, I was focusing on the north side and thinking about that. But the move that precipitated, or the need that precipitated the move, was that Hutton is one of our more oversubscribed. It's one of our fullest schools. They currently are using just about every space that they have as a classroom space, whereas many of our other elementaries, we're trying to provide them with a music room and an art room and a science room and a dedicated space for special education, those sorts of things. And Hutton really doesn't have the space with that, with all of the students in its current boundary. That includes its neighborhood boundary, the gray area down toward the bottom of the screen on the lower right area of the screen. It also includes the gray area and the kind of non-contiguous area, the lower left area, and then a chunk of the purple that we are proposing to move. In addition to using all these classroom spaces at Hutton, most of their classrooms are full. they're above, on average, their classrooms are above the district-wide enrollment averages per classroom and targets of what we're trying to achieve with lower class size, and still would be even after moving sixth graders up to the middle school.
Thank you, Craig. You were moving up to, I think, up to the north part of the district.
Yes. So the other two in the north, the other two schools that are affected, the other two elementaries that are affected by boundary change are Arlington and Lynnwood.
Arlington's in blue and Lynnwood's in purple.
Yeah, Arlington's in light blue, Lynnwood's in light purple. Arlington is currently one of our, also one of our most oversubscribed, one of our fullest schools. And we've just finished, a year ago, we finished construction on the new Lynnwood Elementary and took advantage of the opportunity to rebuild, to build a new Lynnwood. And we built it slightly larger with anticipation that if there was overcrowding anywhere in kind of the north, that we might be able to shift a boundary line to be able to take advantage, to be able to move students. And that is the proposed case between the Lynnwood and Arlington boundaries. Currently, the boundary, and I've lost track of the road, it's the road that is east of Wiscombe right there. It's kind of a diagonalish line. All of the students east of that road currently are part of the Arlington boundary. Lynnwood is a school that now, having been built bigger, has capacity. Arlington is over full, and so being able to move that boundary and draw it over to Nevada was something that the committee felt looked like a reasonable shift.
And as I know we might have one more elementary to talk about, but this is an example where had the committee moved this group of students into Lynnwood from Arlington, the cohort model then sends all of Lynnwood to Salk, where these kids historically with Arlington have gone down to Gary, if I have that correct.
Yes.
And so that would be a change then of the feeder pattern and then because Gary feeds into, I believe, Rogers, correct, Craig?
Yes.
And Salk would feed into, off the top of my head, is it North Central or Shadle Park? Shadle
Park.
So now you have these kids actually having a completely different middle school and high school because of the elementary change. And those are things we looked at carefully. And there's a couple areas in the city like that, but it does keep the kids in their neighborhood together all the way through K-12. So the committee eventually determined that probably trumped other pieces, but that's the kind of feedback we would like to get. Craig, was there another elementary conversation, or would you like to move to middle?
Those were that was all 5 of the elementaries on the north side.
Okay. Then here's the middle school boundaries. You want to maybe give the colors real quick on the north?
Yeah, okay. So on the north, the pink is Salk Middle School. The yellow is the new Northwest Middle School. The gray is the proposal for Glover Middle School. The dark purple is the proposal for the new Northeast Middle School in the foothills area. What are we calling that? Peach is the Shaw Middle School area, and the lilac or light purple is Gary Middle School. One thing that we really struggled with that is not on these maps at the moment, but our city is really divided roughly into thirds. A northwest section, a northeast section, and a south section. And whether you draw the south along the river or the freeway, it doesn't shift a whole lot in terms of what the enrollment numbers overall look like. But we're roughly, very roughly, it's not perfect, but roughly a third of our enrollment is in each of those sections, northwest, northeast, and the south. The challenge that we had is that it's perfect for middle schools. 3 middle schools in the northwest, 3 in the northeast, 3 in the south. It doesn't really work that same way for high schools, where we've got 2 in the northwest, 1 in the northeast, and 2 in the south. And it doesn't work for elementaries, where we have 13 in the Northwest, 9 in the Northeast, and 12 in the South. What we did discover though is, and so that's using division, and that was a concern of our committee members, is a major arterial like that, and trying to not have students and families have to cross major roads like that. What we also just were trying to look at was, we have 3 high schools in the north and 6 middle schools in the north, which kind of pairs up nicely to a cohort pattern of 2 middle schools feeding directly into a single high school. And roughly using that same pattern, we were able to find either 3 or 4 entries that would feed into the middle school. And part of the reason, back to, I mean, I'm repeating a little bit, where we were looking at the circles and the proximity, and also the issue of moving 6th graders into our existing middle schools and not having the space to fit them all. So no matter what we were doing, the middle school boundaries were going to have to change, and the existing middle school boundaries as they were would have had to get smaller, even if we were trying to keep existing middle school students in their existing boundary.
So Craig, can you talk a little bit about like this, the SALC boundaries, for example, are very long and skinny, and there is an area here where kids could live across the street from SALC, but yet they're assigned to the new Northwest Middle School. Can we talk, just remind us why that's the case?
Sure. So in order to essentially fill up each of our middle schools, we had to find populations in the Northwest of roughly 700 to 750 students. And near and around the new Northwest Middle School, there aren't that many students to be able to move into that neighborhood. So we were looking for 3 or 4 elementaries that we felt like it would make sense to try to move into that middle school. And we landed on Indian Trail, Westview, Brown, and Ridgeview.
And you can see, again, we've got these students up in the Woodridge area, which is up north here, and they need to come down to one of the 2 middle schools. And so when they come down into SALC, it fills roughly half of SALC right off the bat. And then pulling from these other side fills SALC, which is one of the reasons that on one side of SALC, students are currently would be assigned to a different school. That's going to be the case somewhat at Glover for the same reason, as you can imagine. We have 3, if I do this carefully, you can see all 3 middle schools in this triangle that are just a mile or 2 apart. And yet our boundaries, as you can imagine, trying to fill those are all those kids in, as Craig said, roughly 1/3 of our district population or more. Craig, are there any issues on this side we should talk about at the middle school level, or should we move to high school?
Yeah, I would say I mean, it's not, they're not issues. It's, as we tried to feed elementaries into middle schools, we were trying to find maybe who are the 3 or 4 nearest elementaries to a middle school without choosing an elementary that might be nearer to another middle school that would then cause one of our other middle schools to not be able to find 3 or 4 elementaries near it.
Okay, thank you, Craig. I do want to get to Q&A, so let's look at high schools quickly, because the feeder pattern that Craig described does create some different feeder patterns than have historically been the case in the north for elementary to middle school. Sorry, from middle school to high school. Craig, do you want to talk about that real quick?
Sure. So in the north, the peach there, the northwest is Salk and New Northwest Middle School, both feeding into Shadle. The light green is Glover and New Northeast Middle School, both feeding into North Central. And the pink is Gary Middle School and Shaw Middle School, both feeding into Rogers. One of the areas, as with the middle schools, and really even with some of our elementaries that we haven't changed the boundaries, we do have places where our elementaries, our middle schools, and our high schools sit on the edge of their boundary. And Shadle Park is one of those that is right on the edge of the boundary. What we were looking at was, in order to be able to continue the feeder pattern philosophy that we had, it was taking the two middle schools that were further north than Shadle and having them feed into Shadle. As anyone that has lived in the city for a while is aware, our current version has students in the Indian Trail neighborhood and in the Lynnwood neighborhood being bused really past Shadle and down to North Central. And what we were attempting to do was try to use consistent feeder patterns and try to fit the furthest away, the students that, to not have those students that are furthest away have to travel even farther.
So in a sense, again, the students from the northwest corner come down, those students above Shadle Park fill Shadle Park. So that if you live below Shadle Park, it's already been filled by the students above it, and there are no other schools north of them to choose from, which means that if you live below Shadle Park, now the next available school is North Central. Is that a fair explanation of it? And again, go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, on this particular map, we didn't get the coloring shaded to show Shadle would actually be peach and not green.
Correct. The one thing we are confident about is, again, the rebalancing of high schools means that for students, for example, that might live in really close to Shadle Park, a few blocks, and they would be in the North Central attendance area under these things, there's most likely going to be ample room at all high schools for students to choice in if they want a different program or if they want a different location than their assigned school. More so for sure than at the middle or the elementary levels consistently. We won't know those actual final numbers yet, but go ahead, Craig.
In the current makeup that we have, where the North Central boundary essentially surrounds the Shadle boundary, a boundary that we haven't changed in nearly 40 years, it has created enrollment size inequities where Shadle has only about 1,200 students within its kind of circular boundary that is the students that are really right around Shadle Park. And then our largest high school, Lewis and Clark, is north of 1,700, almost 1,800 students. So we've created, by our current boundaries, we have a 500 to 600 student disparity between our smallest high school and our largest high school. Having redrawn these boundaries the way that we have, the proposal would move the disparity closer to about 200, with roughly the smallest school being in the 1,400 range and the largest school being around 1,600.
Thank you, Craig. Well, we went just a couple minutes past when I'd hoped we'd finish, but we wanted to bring forth those tension points that the committee struggles with, because we certainly want feedback from you and your communities on those as they influence the committee's work going back to refining this and seeing if they can make it just even a little bit better before it's finalized. We're going to move now to the Q&A section. And Mark, if you want to bring that slide up, there's two ways you can post your questions in the Q&A. We do have a few that we've already indicated we'd like to answer live. Many questions, and again, you've seen about 30 questions answered already. If you want to look over there at the Q&A, if you haven't been. In addition, if you sometimes you need to process, like I'm a processor, you can send your questions later to boundaries@sps81.org, and you'll get an immediate response that it was received, and then those all go to all of sort of the folks you see here in the core group, and then we will compile them and put them together and bring them forward to the committee also. So your feedback will get to the committee in either way. And we're also collecting all and summarizing all the information tonight for the committee also. So I did see a couple questions. One question was about the cohorting model, and I'll just go ahead and take that one. It was a concern that the cohorting model might be biased in favor of families who are financially stable, and those families that experience instability in housing might not benefit from that. There's a couple things there. One is the transition research has shown that the students who are the least stable and are challenged the most in school are the ones that benefit the most from having mitigated transitions, generally mitigated with their peer cohort and remaining with their neighborhood. One thing that other cities have found is that when they went to a neighborhood model where families stayed together and kids stayed together through their process, not necessarily went to this school or that school, but they stayed together, kids were known. And the benefit of being known is huge. And maybe, Matt, I know I didn't ask you earlier, but could you talk just a little bit about the sort of the rationale of students and families being known in a school and the power that has for kids, especially kids who might be experiencing some instability?
Sure. So that's kind of what it's all about, is relationships. And so we try at SALT to set relationships as the foundation for everything we do. And it's just easier when you know families, kids know each other. So we talk about the different tiers of relationships. The student teacher obviously is important, but student to student relationships are critical as well. And teacher to family relationships are critical. And it just, you know, the more familiarity there is, the easier it is to build those relationships and use those to enhance the educational experience.
Thank you, Matt. So we really, oh, go ahead. Oh,
sorry, there was just one question about like gang violence. And so keeping like the cohorts together, would that keep gang violence down or encourage it? I guess I'm curious myself.
yeah, I don't know that I saw that question and I don't know that we can answer that. I think we would need to dig some deeper into the specifics of that concern in Spokane, and I don't have that information. I know that there are districts that have tried to not acknowledge that, and they've struggled, big cities, and there are districts that have acknowledged it and been successful in dealing with it. And I think that's the key. So I think, Lindsay, similar to how we talked a little bit about some of the equity pieces are really programmatic and not boundary related. I think that one probably falls a little bit more on that side, but I think we want to be aware of it. So I appreciate the question. And I think we need to do some research and we'll get back to that individual. And if it's a prevalent question, we haven't seen that yet before, but if it's a prevalent question, we can post it to the FAQ also.
Thank you.
You bet. Great way. Oh yeah, there's a question that says, is it possible to get a copy of the chart that was shared showing the free and reduced lunch rates between the planning, again, they're planning numbers, but basically between the current and the proposed. And in fact, yes, in fact, more than that, that's just a snapshot. We'll put the whole data set up. We'll have free and reduced lunch for all three levels, elementary, middle, and high, as well as special education, all the data that the committee's been seeing. We'll post that with a little cover sheet to explain what it is. So
And just fill one caveat, and I think I had mentioned it earlier. We use this for planning purposes, this modeling, but what the free and reduced lunch count really turns out to be is affected by our choice policy of choicing in and out. So in some ways it's modeling it, but it won't be exactly what it really is, because I'll use North Central High School as an example. North Central High School has an option program called the Institute for Science and Technology that's very, very popular. It's a very big program. Grades 7 through 12 will turn out to be grades 6 through 12. That actually reduces North Central's free and reduced lunch percentage because higher income kids choice into that program. So that's one example of how choice programs can influence the free and reduced lunch rates in the school.
thank you. Exactly. So we have to be careful that they're never exact numbers till school starts. And then they shift a little bit, but for planning purposes, the committee wanted to get a sense of impact on changes. And I think that was that was a very good way of getting that impact. There was another question that I'd like to ask Ryan if he's available to answer. I'm not seeing Ryan for some reason, but you know, Ryan, the question is, someone bought a home really near Shadle Park, And now that student, which is that area we talked about, will now go to NC. You know, can we get a sense of how, or maybe Craig, you can answer, how much space do we anticipate there might be, for example, at Shadle Park with the rebalancing? Ryan or Craig can answer.
I'll take that one. So the capacity of all of our high schools, and I'm going to look at Greg to nod, is roughly between 1,700 and 1,800 students. At North Central, it's a little bit smaller because we are maintaining room for the IST program, the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade program. But as we have modeled and tried to find ways to redistribute students to get, you know, roughly 1,400 to 1,600 students, there should be enough space for choice into or out of any of our high schools. And there was a question on here about transportation for high schools. For high schools in particular, we do offer yellow bus transportation within the current boundary to the current school, but we also offer bus passes. That's part of what you have access to as a student in our district. STA bus pass that if other transportation is not available to you, that would be a way to access choice, is by getting a bus pass and using the city system.
And another question that Stephanie, maybe you could answer is, you know, when are we changing boundaries? Why are we making the decision right this spring when the new Northeast Middle School and the new Northwest Middle School won't open for another year till the 2022-23? Why is it important, Stephanie, to you and your team to know where your kids are coming from?
Well, I mean, as we're talking about building community and relationships and creating a space for students to be welcomed in, it's really important for us to have the opportunity as a school to collaborate with their home schools or their elementary schools and really get to know who they are before they even come into the middle school, so we can make sure that we have the opportunity to create appropriate programming and opportunity, or I said opportunity a couple of times, but we really want to give them access to programming and voice and ensuring that they have the most high quality education possible. And the way to do that is to get to know who our kiddos are and our families and our communities.
So that's going to be your work next year, then, I take it, after
Absolutely.
the boundaries are set. Gotcha.
Absolutely.
Well, and that's, you know, that's one of the other advantages we hope to accomplish with the feeder pattern, is that each middle school only has to work with 3 or 4 elementaries. The way our current boundaries are, most of our middle schools, when they come down, they have to divide and say, oh, well, I'm taking, you know, for Matt, who's at Salk and going to an elementary that has a split boundary right now, he's trying to develop relationships with some of the kids, but not all of the kids. Whereas with a new plan, we would be able to target or to focus and reach all the kids at 3 or 4 elementaries and focus our efforts.
Thank you. Thank you both. I'm going to answer one question real quick, and then I'm going to try to have someone answer 3 questions. Harriam, get ready. There's 3 questions around equity that I'd like to toss to you. So the quick one that I'm going to take is, let's see, where did it go? Well, it looks like maybe someone answered it. I was going to answer it live. The question was, now I've lost it. Well, shoot. Well, I'm glad you got your, I think it was Amy, and I think she got her question answered live. I'll go double check that. The questions I wanted to send to Harriam to answer, or we have a couple 3 versions of what I think are the same questions. One is, you know, a concern about the cohort model not taking into consideration some of the more complex issues, such as inequalities. And using that term inequalities, I'll assume that's an equity question about equity of program possibly between schools. And then I have another one talking about extracurricular activities are very expensive for families, and how will lower income students keep up concerning the extracurricular activities, not just sports. And there was one more, how will the new redistricting approach the topic of equality and diversity, which again, socioeconomic diversity is the greatest diversity in Spokane, and equity of program. Hiram, can you talk, I'm going to click each of those as having an answer, but Hiram, can you talk a little bit about how that fits into boundary and how it doesn't fit into boundary, and what the district is doing and will continue to do once the boundaries are reset?
Yeah, so just so that folks understand, the programming piece and programming equity is outside of the scope of the boundary work that we're doing. That's a separate thing. And in fact, Spokane has already started that process around equity because, you know, we use the word equity, and for me, it means something a little bit different maybe than other people. And I will be honest about that and say that it's not necessarily equal. Equity is about getting access to opportunities and fulfilling the needs that individual students have. Now, to that end, the district has embarked as part of their equity policy resolution that they passed, said there are concrete things that they're already undertaking. One is a diversity advisory council, and setting that up to be making recommendations about equitable student-centered learning and the student-centered environment. They're going to continue with a lot of training on anti-racism and professional development at the staff level and building cultural competency of the staff, and also involved with culturally responsive training for the school community, not only for the staff, but for the students and the parents and partners as well. And all of this, you know, and Matt was talking about this a little bit, is having that dialogue with not only the building staff, but with the school community writ large. And the kind of tying it all together is the work that they're doing on diversity, increasing the diversity, quite frankly, of the employee pool. All of those things are tied together. That I know the district is, come this fall, actually hiring someone from outside to help build up the capacity to hire, recruit, and retain a more diverse workforce for the district. So those are all things that are tied to it. But again, not necessarily, that isn't part of the boundary work per se, but the boundary work is pushing at that work in a sense, because we need to do that work to fulfill our desire and need for making sure that every school is a quality school.
Thank you, Hiram. And so again, that the balance, and the committee struggles with this in every map iteration, the balance between looking at diversity or equity, especially as described, not only from free and reduced lunch numbers, but also from knowing the schools and the programs being delivered in the schools and the challenges of each school, as well as with adjusting boundaries to keep kids together. And that is a tension that the committee is struggling with. And so that's why we want to have these community forums. There's a couple more, there's some questions here. And again, if we don't get to your question, we have just a few we're not probably going to get to, but you will receive an answer if you give us a few days. We'll get back to you. We've answered 46 questions so far, so I'm kind of excited about that. There's a question, will there be bus hubs available for legacy students? I believe, Mark, the answer is transportation will be provided as it is done today. Is that correct?
That's true. And yes, we will still use our hub system, which has been for really our option programs. But if that's an area that we will look at providing that also for students, you know, who may want to go to a school outside their attendance area. At high schools, it's much easier because we're also able to supplement our yellow bus service with STA bus passes. And that's readily available for our, actually for middle and high school students. So it'd be more applicable to elementary. Yeah.
Thank you. And Sean, I'm gonna put you on the spot, and I don't know is a fair answer, but this is a middle school question. Is someone saying that is there a way to understand, especially with the new middle schools coming online, the program being delivered at the middle school level? I know that the grade configuration change led to a middle school committee to look at what a 6-8 program looked like. Is there a way for families to find out what the program will be at middle school, and will it be the same at every middle school? Do you know?
Well, we did create some guiding principles for all of our middle schools as our new middle schools are coming on, where there will be I'll just say a baseline of programming and philosophy that will be in every one of our middle schools. Each middle school leadership team will also have some autonomy to do some unique things for their own particular school. So it will be kind of a combination, but there will be structures that will exist in every single one of our middle schools. And those guidelines, those principles were relevant to our core curriculum, our elective program, just the environment, as well as the extracurricular. And so there are going to be some structures and parameters that will ensure, again, a baseline of programming that's somewhat consistent from school to school. And then there will also be the opportunity for each middle school to also bring some autonomy to their particular school.
And since I have you, Sean, we had another question. Can you give a sense of a timeline when staff will be hired for the new middle schools so that they can get a sense of starting to know their students? I see Stephanie smiling and nodding.
Well, I was just going to say, maybe our middle school principal would like to speak to
Maybe
that.
Stephanie can speak to that.
Well, as you can tell, I'm chomping at the bit. I can't wait to start the process, but I do believe we're starting we have started the process of, we have our planning committee currently in place, of course, as you all know, and then we're starting to take a look at the end of this year and into next year, bringing on some more of the administration crew, and then into next year, we will start the process of hiring our teachers and support staff for that school.
Thank you.
And I might just follow on Sean's comment. Greg Forsyth, who's our Director of Capital Projects, has been working with Stephanie, Mark Lind at Glover Middle School, John Sweat at Shaw Middle School. And our new school designs are going to be much, much different, pretty innovative of how we have neighborhoods for students. So our 6th graders can be together in a neighborhood. Our 7th and 8th grader may mingle more, but the designs of and Glover's and Shaw are out of the ground and almost finished. Wonderful new middle schools for environments for our kids that we've used students actually to help us in thinking about the designs for those new schools, plus Stephanie and her staff, as well as the staff at Glover and Shaw and the New Northwest.
Thank you all. I'm just looking at the questions, and we have a couple open that we need to research to get back to you. And we have a few comments that we will get back to you on the comments, but I don't know that, that they don't elicit necessarily an answer from the panel. So it looks like with just a couple minutes left, again, you can feel free to send your questions to on the SPS website is a link, an email address where you can continue to send questions, and we will take them all the way through. There'll be a public hearing on June 2nd. Mark, why don't you give us the rest of the schedule? Bring that. I think you have a slide up for that, and we can just talk through sort of your opportunities for engagement from here until when the board makes a final decision.
So as Phil just said, feel free to email us and we'll get responses back to you. All of this information, all of the questions tonight from the other night as well, last Thursday, those will all get digested by the committee as we go back to work. And that's our next step is in May, we're going to go back to work and refine our proposal. And then the public then will have 2 more opportunities. June 2nd, there will be a public hearing. And in that case, it won't be this webinar format. Actually, citizens can come and comment to the board. They will listen to the comments about the proposal, as will our committee. There'll be then a first reading draft, and the board may request some changes, may request some of our committee to make some changes, but that'll be another public hearing on June 16th. And then finally, we would like the board to adopt the final changes in June, as I mentioned, so that Stephanie and her team and Matthew and his team, they can get to work at getting to know their neighborhoods. It'll be a full year of getting to know the new neighborhoods for all the principals at all levels. And then the boundaries on the north side will go into effect the 22-23 school year. That's when we open those 2 new middle schools on the north side. And then it'll be the following year, 23-24, that we will open the school, the new South Middle School, and change the boundaries on the south. So we are, it'll be here before you know it. And that's why we're getting everybody educated to the need for doing this, what the current draft is, getting your feedback as well. So I want to thank everyone for attending tonight. As we mentioned, you'll get information if your question didn't get answered tonight, you'll get it. If you send an email into the Boundary Committee, we'll be answering those. Sandra Gerard and her team and our communications department is working hard on those. And if you'd like to come to the Southside forums next week, feel free. It'll be one on this Thursday, and then one the following Monday, the 26th. So with that, panelists, thank you very much for all of your work on in helping us develop this draft, and for your continued work to listen to the public's comments and refine our committee's draft to present to the board in June. So with that, thanks everyone. Have a great evening, and thanks panelists.